Elara Jovanović moved with quiet efficiency through the gleaming halls of Olympus General, a freshly starched uniform a size too big for her slight frame. To most, she was just another rookie nurse, a ghost in the prestigious machine, her modest Eastern European accent barely audible over the hospital's hum. She observed everything, yet was noticed by no one, especially not by the bustling elite medical staff. The tranquility shattered with a piercing cry, incoming. Pediatric trauma. A gurney slammed through the ER doors, carrying Ren Sato, a small boy, limp and pale, his chest blooming crimson through shredded clothes. His parents, Kenji and Mei, followed, their faces masks of silent, primal terror. The air crackled with desperate urgency, every second a hammer blow against hope. Chaos erupted. Dr. Raj Patel, chief surgeon, barked orders. Dr. Astrid Müller, sharp and efficient, elbowed past Elara without a glance, dismissing her as just a floater. Elara, pushed to the periphery, felt the familiar sting of invisibility. Yet, her eyes, usually downcast, now burned with an intensity no one saw. She wasn't just observing the chaos, she was dissecting it, every impossible angle. A quiet certainty began to bloom within her, a knowledge too potent to be ignored. Ren's life depended on it, and Elara knew, deep in her bones, that only she held the key. The ultramodern surgical suite at Olympus General hummed with a terrifying efficiency that belied the chaos it barely contained. Gleaming chrome and sterile white surfaces reflected the intense, focused lights above, illuminating the small, fragile form of Ren Sato. Monitors blinked, tubes snaked, and the air thrummed with the high-stakes dance of life and death. Dr. Raj Patel, chief surgeon, his usually immaculate dark hair slightly disheveled, commanded the space with a palpable intensity. His deep-set eyes, usually calm pools of authority, now darted between the endoscopic feeds and Ren's increasingly erratic vital signs. Beside him, Dr. Astrid Müller, a rising star of surgical precision, moved with a controlled ferocity, her brow furrowed in concentration. They were titans in their field, their reputations forged in countless successful, intricate procedures. But Ren Sato was presenting them with something different, a ghost in the machine. Multiple bullet fragments, tiny and insidious, had burrowed deep into Ren's delicate internal landscape, perilously close to the spine, one lodged in a major artery, another dangerously near nerve clusters. The conventional instruments, designed for larger, more accessible targets, were proving useless. Every delicate probing, every attempted maneuver, carried the terrifying risk of causing catastrophic bleeding or irreversible paralysis. The stakes were not just Ren's life, but the child's future. From the observation room, Kenji and Mei Sato watched, their faces pale and drawn, their silent prayers a heavy weight in the sterile air. Elara Jovanović, a nurse by definition but a shadow in practice, stood further back, ostensibly managing instruments but truly absorbing every detail. Her modest appearance, her quiet demeanor, painted her as just another cog in Olympus's vast machinery. Yet, her eyes missed nothing. She saw the nuanced tremors in Raj's hand, the almost imperceptible flicker of doubt in Astrid's usually unshakable gaze. More importantly, she saw the problem. The standard approach was exacerbating the delicate tissue damage, causing more localized swelling, making the tiny fragments even more elusive. The sophisticated tools were, ironically, too blunt. "Damn it, the visibility is horrendous," Raj muttered, his voice tight with frustration. He retracted a microforcep, a bead of sweat tracing a path down his temple. "Dr. Müller, try the ultrasonic probe again. See if you can get a better read on the anterior fragment." Astrid nodded, her movements sharp. "Already attempted, Chief. The tissue edema is too significant. We're essentially operating blind on a microscopic scale." She gestured curtly to Elara. "Nurse Jovanović, ensure suction is calibrated for microhemorrhage." Elara adjusted the settings with practiced ease, but her mind was elsewhere. She'd seen this before. Not in the gleaming theaters of Olympus General, but under the harsh glare of a single utility lamp in a dusty tent. She knew the way tissue reacted, the feel of metal against sinew, the almost imperceptible vibrations that signaled proximity. Her gaze lingered on the endoscopic feed, her mind tracing alternative pathways, a different kind of map forming. "Sir," Elara began softly, her voice barely a whisper against the hum of machines, "the trajectory suggests the fragment near the L3 vertebra might be best approached with a different angle of leverage. From the posterior aspect, perhaps, using minimal instrumentation." Raj paused, his hand hovering over the surgical field. He turned his head slowly, his eyes narrowing. "Nurse Jovanović, I appreciate your initiative, but this is a complex spinal trauma. We are following established protocols for fragment extraction. Leave the strategy to the surgeons." His tone was polite, but utterly dismissive, like swatting at an annoying fly. Astrid, without looking up, added, "This isn't a field dressing, nurse. Olympus General has a reputation for precision, not improvisation." The implied slight hung heavy in the air. Elara felt a familiar prick of indignation, swiftly doused by the cold reality of her place in this hierarchy. She bowed her head, acknowledging the rebuke, but her observations intensified. Minutes bled into an hour. The rhythmic beeping of the monitors grew more frantic. Ren's blood pressure began to drop steadily, a silent alarm bell echoing through the room. Raj and Astrid, once supremely confident, now moved with a growing desperation. Their meticulous, by-the-book methods, the very foundation of their brilliance, were failing them. The instruments, so precise, so advanced, seemed to mock their efforts. The fragments remained stubbornly out of reach, deep within the delicate, swelling tissue. Raj slammed a gloved hand lightly on the instrument tray, a rare display of frustration. "It's impossible. We risk a total vertebral artery occlusion with any further attempt at this angle. The posterior fragment is completely encased." Astrid's face was grim. "And the internal bleeding is escalating. If we can't get them out soon, he'll clot off or bleed out. Paralysis will be the least of his concerns." Her voice, usually so composed, held a tremor of defeat. The air in the room grew heavy, thick with the scent of antiseptic and the burgeoning fear of failure. Kenji and Mei, watching from above, pressed their hands against the glass, their silent pleas for their son becoming a physical weight. Elara watched the despair settling over the elite surgeons, a cold dread seeping into the pristine room. She knew. She had seen this type of trauma countless times, the precise, intimate dance of extracting something that didn't belong. Her knowledge was not theoretical, it was visceral, etched into her very bones. She saw the way their instruments snagged, the way their approaches were creating micro-tears that exacerbated the problem. A solution, radical and terrifying in its simplicity, solidified in her mind. But who would listen to a quiet nurse from the periphery when the best minds in the country were at their wits' end? The clock ticked louder, each second echoing the fading hope for young Ren Sato. The sterile hum of the operating theater became a frantic symphony as Ren Sato's condition veered sharply south. The steady beep-beep-beep of the cardiac monitor abruptly accelerated, turning into a distressed staccato. A ripple of alarm spread through the room, tightening already taut nerves. "Pressure's dropping, Dr. Patel," the anesthesiologist called out, his voice sharp with concern. "HR spiking. We're losing him." Dr. Raj Patel, sweat beading on his brow, swore under his breath. He had been meticulously trying to isolate another fragment near Ren's spinal column, his brow furrowed in concentration. The sheer size and bulk of his gloved hands, usually an advantage, felt cumbersome in the impossibly delicate space. He leaned closer to the monitor, his gaze flickering between the digital readout and the microscopic view of the surgical field. "Increase fluids. Get a fresh unit of blood ready." Dr. Astrid Müller, equally strained, had been working on a different cluster of fragments, her usually steady hand now betraying a tremor. "The microforceps aren't getting purchase. It's too deep, too encased." Her voice was edged with a frustration that bordered on despair. Elara watched, her heart a heavy drum against her ribs. She saw it all with horrifying clarity. Raj's careful probing, while incredibly precise by conventional standards, was inadvertently irritating the surrounding tissue, causing microhemorrhages that the body, already under immense stress, couldn't afford. He was pushing against the fragment's natural trajectory, not with it. and Astrid's meticulous attempts to secure the area, while textbook, were subtly compressing the very structures that needed to yield, making the fragments extraction even more like trying to pull sand from a clenched fist. Dr. Patel, Elara began quietly, her voice barely audible above the rising chaos, perhaps if the angle of approach were less direct? A lateral sweep might offer better purchase without risking further tears. Raj didn't even look up. Nurse, I appreciate your observations, but I've been doing this for 20 years. His tone was clipped, dismissive. We're past lateral sweeps. This is a direct, critical extraction. Astrid scoffed, though her eyes were glued to her own efforts. We are not in a sweeping situation, nurse. We are in a life-or-death situation. A knot of hot frustration tightened in Elara's gut. They weren't seeing it. Their brilliance, their training, their very experience was blinding them to the simple, almost primitive truth of this trauma. The fragments were tiny, yes, but they were also almost weightless, requiring a touch that wasn't about force, but about understanding their path of least resistance. Her own understanding came from a different school, one where textbook procedures were often secondary to instinct and brutal necessity. Outside the glass, Kenji and Ren Sato watched, their faces pale and drawn. Kenji's hand, pressed against the glass, was shaking visibly. May had crumpled into the arms of a social worker, her sobs echoing faintly even through the soundproof barrier, a haunting reminder of the innocence hanging in the balance. Back in the sterile theater, Ren's body gave a sudden, full-body spasm. The monitor screamed a deafening, continuous tone. Code Blue, someone yelled. He's crashing. The room plunged into organized pandemonium. Nurses rushed forward, pushing medication, preparing defibrillators. Raj's face contorted in a mask of desperation. He pulled back, his instruments clattering against the metal tray. Damn it! We're losing too much blood. His pressure is unrecoverable without getting these fragments out now. Astrid's hands hovered, useless, over the open wound. The weight of their combined expertise, their years of saving lives, was crushing them. They had reached the absolute limits of conventional medicine, and beyond it lay only the cold, hard reality of failure. Elara felt the familiar prickle of adrenaline, cold and sharp. Her breath hitched. She had seen this moment too many times, the precipice where life teetered, and all known paths led to oblivion. But she still saw the solution. It wasn't a sweep. It was something else entirely. Something born of chaos and necessity. Her eyes, usually so unassuming, hardened with a fierce, unwavering resolve. Ren's life was slipping away, and the answers she held, dismissed and ignored, were his last, best hope. The silence from the monitors, save for the frantic calls of the team, felt like the world holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable. But Elara knew it didn't have to be inevitable. Not yet. Just like Elara, haven't we all felt overlooked at times, our true potential unseen? This story of an unsung hero reminds us that courage and competence often hide in plain sight. If you're moved by tales of underdogs proving their worth and changing perceptions, then you're already part of our community. Join us formally. Hit that subscribe button below and become a vital member of our global family that cherishes these narratives. Your support helps us immensely in bringing more compelling, heartwarming, and expertly crafted stories like Elara's to life. Thank you for making this channel possible. The air in the ore, already thick with despair, suddenly fractured. A piercing, insistent shriek from the monitors sliced through the room. Ren's heart rate was plummeting, his blood pressure dropping into critical territory. Code Blue. He's crashing, a nurse yelled, her voice raw with terror. The controlled panic of moments before erupted into outright chaos. Instruments clattered, voices rose in desperate questions, and the anesthesiologist barked urgent commands to increase medication. Astrid, her face pale, stepped back from the table as if recoiling from a live wire. He's losing too much blood, too fast. We've got nothing. Her usually sharp tone was now laced with a frantic edge, the veneer of cool competence shattering under the brutal reality of failure. Dr. Patel, usually a fortress of calm, felt a cold dread clamp around his own heart. He looked down at Ren, the tiny chest rising and falling so weakly, the pallor of his skin deepening to an alarming gray. This wasn't just a surgical challenge, it was a personal defeat, a stain on Olympus General's flawless record, a life slipping through his fingers. He had exhausted every known technique, every cutting-edge innovation. He was a brilliant man, but brilliance had its limits, and he had hit them. He was out of options. Utterly, terrifyingly, empty. In that maelstrom of fear and collapsing hope, Elara Jovanović moved. It wasn't a sudden, dramatic leap, it was a quiet, almost imperceptible shift, like the turning of a great, silent engine. She had been invisible for so long, a shadow in the periphery, but the urgency of Ren's dying breath ignited something deep within her, a force that had been forged in flames and chaos. All the frustration, the quiet observations, the dismissed suggestions, they coalesced into an unshakable certainty. She knew what to do. Her voice, when it came, was soft, yet it cut through the din of the code blue like a surgeon's scalpel through tissue. Dr. Patel. Dr. Müller. No one heard her at first. The team was too focused on the flatlining monitors, on the scramble to revive the failing child. Elara took another step, closer to the operating table, into the sacred, unspoken circle of the lead surgeons. Her eyes, usually downcast, now held an intensity that was almost unnerving. She lifted her chin, the subtle movement a declaration. "He needs manual extraction," she repeated, louder this time, her voice gaining a steely resonance that commanded attention. "It's not a sweep. It's a targeted removal. I can reach them." The room went silent, save for the frantic beeping of the life support machines. Every head turned towards her. Astrid stared, mouth agape, her brow furrowed in utter disbelief. "Jovanović, what are you talking about? Are you insane? We've tried everything. There's no manual way to do this without causing further damage. It's impossible." Her voice was shrill, laced with both fear and professional indignation. Raj spun around, his face a mask of exhaustion and irritation. "Nurse Jovanović, this is not the time for suggestions. We're losing him. Get back to your station." He felt a surge of anger, not just at her audacity, but at the sheer helplessness he felt. How dare this rookie nurse imply he had missed something, that he wasn't doing enough? His ego, wounded and vulnerable in the face of imminent failure, lashed out. But Elara didn't flinch. The fear was there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was overshadowed by a far greater fear, the fear of letting Ren die when she held the key. This wasn't about protocol or hierarchy anymore, it was about a child's life. Her transformation was complete. The quiet, unassuming rookie had vanished, replaced by a woman whose resolve was absolute, a veteran of life and death stakes. The fragments are tiny, lodged deep, yes, she conceded, her gaze unwavering as she met Raj's furious eyes. But they are also accessible, if approached differently. Not with instruments designed for tissue, but with a different kind of precision. I know their trajectory. I can feel them. She held up her hands, steady and strong. I can remove them without further damage. But we have to act now. Raj looked at her, truly looked at her, for the first time. He saw not a timid junior nurse, but a fierce, almost primal determination burning in her eyes. He saw conviction, not madness. His anger faltered, replaced by a flicker of desperate curiosity. His mind raced. Ren was dying. He had no other path. His prestige, his career, his very identity as a brilliant surgeon were on the line, but a child's life was infinitely more valuable. The struggle between his ingrained hierarchy, his professional ego, and the stark, terrifying necessity of the moment was agonizing. "You feel them," he whispered, skepticism battling with a sliver of desperate hope. Elara nodded, her gaze sweeping over the fading monitors, then back to his face. "With my fingers. It's the only way. It requires direct contact, minimal manipulation, and absolute steadiness." The silence in the room stretched, thick and heavy. The beeping of Ren's heart monitor grew weaker, more erratic. This was it. The precipice. Raj saw no other solution. He saw only a dying child and a rookie nurse claiming an impossible, almost blasphemous, method. Yet, he also saw the unshakable certainty in her gaze, a certainty that defied reason but offered the slimmest, most terrifying chance. He swallowed hard, his voice hoarse. His eyes darted to the monitors, then back to Elara. Every fiber of his being screamed against it, but his conscience, his desperation to save Ren, screamed louder. "Nurse Jovanović," he said, his voice barely audible, raw with defeat and a nascent, desperate trust. "Show me." It was a surrender. A colossal, humbling surrender of ego for the sake of a child. Astrid prepped the field around her hands. He couldn't even bring himself to say her fingers. A collective gasp went through the room. Astrid looked aghast, but seeing the raw anguish and grim determination on Raj's face, she moved. The transformation was complete. Elara, the invisible rookie, was now the focal point, the last, best hope. Her hands, steady and purposeful, reached for the sterile gloves offered to her, her heart pounding not with fear, but with the quiet, urgent rhythm of a life waiting to be saved. The medical procedure was about to begin, but the real drama, the profound human shift, had already taken place. A hush, thick and suffocating, descended upon the operating theater. It wasn't the usual surgical quiet, but an anticipatory silence, laden with disbelief and the desperate hope clinging to a fragile thread. All eyes were on Elara. She accepted the sterile gloves, her movements precise, unhurried, as if this was merely another routine task in a long, unremarkable day. Yet, her eyes, when she finally looked up, held a fierce, unyielding intensity that belied her modest exterior. They were the eyes of someone who had seen too much, understood too deeply, and was now absolutely, terrifyingly focused. "Scalpel," Elara requested, her voice a low, steady murmur that cut through the silence like a sharpened blade. Astrid, still reeling from Raj's surrender, automatically presented the instrument. Elara took it, her fingers delicate as she made a tiny, almost imperceptible incision near where the imaging had shown the deepest, most dangerous fragment lodged. It was a precise point, chosen with an intuitive understanding that baffled even Raj. She didn't hesitate, didn't remeasure, didn't consult. She just knew. Then, she discarded the scalpel. A ripple of confusion went through the room. Elara didn't reach for forceps, or suction, or any of the myriad instruments that cluttered the sterile trays. Instead, she extended her bare, gloved index and middle fingers, impossibly slender, into the minuscule opening. It was an act of audacious intimacy, of raw, unadulterated human touch where only cold steel had been expected. Dr. Patel stiffened, a faint tremor running through him. This was madness. Unscientific. Unprofessional. His mind screamed against the primal, almost barbaric simplicity of her approach. But then he saw it, the absolute stillness of Elara's posture, the way her breath was held, the almost supernatural focus radiating from her. Her fingers, guided by an invisible map only she could see, were not probing blindly. They were moving with a terrifyingly deliberate grace, a dance of micro-adjustments within the delicate, unseen landscape of Ren's shattered flesh. Astrid, watching over Elara's shoulder, felt a prickle of unease morph into something akin to dread. She had dismissed this woman, looked down on her, scoffed at her very presence. Now, watching Elara's hands, Astrid felt the foundations of her own surgical dogma begin to crack. The precise, almost sculptural movements of Elara's fingers seemed to defy anatomy, twisting and turning in a way that should have caused more trauma, not less. Time stretched, distended. The air in the room grew heavy, each breath held in collective suspense. The only sound was the rhythmic, desperate beeping of the cardiac monitor, a stark reminder of the child's precarious grip on life. Elara didn't seem to hear it. She was in a world of her own, a silent, internal battlefield where touch was sight and intuition was the surgeon's knife. And then, with a barely perceptible flick of her wrist, Elara's fingers withdrew. Nestled between her gloved fingertips, glinting wetly, was a tiny, jagged shard of metal. It was impossibly small, yet impossibly significant. The fragment that had evaded every sophisticated instrument, every elite surgeon, now lay captured, a dark trophy of quiet defiance. A collective gasp, thin and sharp, sliced through the operating room. It was a sound born of sheer, unadulterated shock. Dr. Patel's jaw dropped. His eyes, fixed on the minuscule bullet fragment, widened in utter disbelief. He had dismissed her, scorned her, written her off as an amateur nurse. Yet, there it was. Proof. Undeniable, tangible proof of an expertise that defied everything he knew. Astrid stared, her face a mask of profound astonishment. The precision, the speed, the almost casual ease with which Elara had achieved the impossible, it was humbling, infuriating, and utterly captivating. A chill ran down her spine. This wasn't just skill, this was something else entirely. Something honed by a different kind of fire. Elara, seemingly oblivious to the stunned reactions, simply placed the fragment in a sterile dish. Without a word, without a moment's pause, her gaze returned to Ren. Her hand, steady as stone, reached once more into the small incision. The act was repeated, a silent ballet of fingers navigating the unseen. The tension, which had momentarily broken with the first success, now ratcheted up even higher. Was it a fluke? A lucky shot? No. A few moments later, another fragment, equally minute and treacherous, emerged. Then another. And another. Each time, a silent, collective breath was held, then released as the dark metal materialized. Elara wasn't just removing bullets, she was retrieving hope, piece by agonizing piece. The impossible was being unraveled before their very eyes, by the most unassuming hands in the room. Raj, his ego momentarily forgotten, felt a strange, unfamiliar emotion stir within him, a mix of profound awe and dawning, terrifying respect. The room, once a crucible of panic, had transformed into a chapel of agonizing anticipation. Each extracted fragment was a tiny victory, yet the war was far from won. There were still more, the most recalcitrant ones, nestled perilously close to the spinal cord, threatening permanent damage with the slightest misstep. The air itself seemed to thicken, heavy with the collective weight of hope and fear, all eyes locked on Elara's every-minute movement. Her brow was beaded with a fine sheen of sweat, but her hands remained as steady as a surgeon's at their peak. Her focus was absolute, a silent, unyielding force that seemed to draw all other energy into its vortex. She worked with an almost supernatural intuition, a dance between sight and touch that bypassed conventional understanding. Dr. Patel, still leaning heavily against the console, found his breath hitched in his throat. He watched Elara's fingers, which seemed to possess a delicate sentience of their own, navigating the complex internal landscape of Ren's small body. Dr. Müller, usually so composed, was gripping the edge of a monitor, her knuckles white. The dismissiveness she usually reserved for junior staff had evaporated, replaced by a dawning, almost fearful, reverence. Every second stretched, elastic and thin, threatening to snap. Elara paused, her eyes momentarily closing, a flicker of something profound crossing her face before she reopened them, sharper, more resolute than before. She leaned in closer, her breath a ghost against the child's pale skin. This was it. The last one. The one that could paralyze, the one that could kill. It was nestled deeper, more awkwardly than the others, a microscopic needle in a haystack of vital tissue. A collective gasp escaped the onlookers as Elara's hand plunged once more, deeper, more daringly than before. Time dissolved. Only the soft, rhythmic beep of the cardiac monitor punctuated the silence, a fragile heartbeat mirroring the fading pulse of hope in the room. Then, a barely perceptible tremor ran through Elara's wrist. Her fingers, with agonizing slowness, began to retract. And there it was. A tiny, jagged shard of metal, smaller than a grain of rice, glinted under the harsh lights, held delicately between her fingertips. The release was not instantaneous, but a gradual, rolling wave. A silent, collective exhale swept through the operating theater, a soundless sigh of utter, profound relief. Elara gently placed the final fragment in the sterile dish, her hand not quite trembling, but bearing the immense strain it had just endured. Then, her shoulders, which had been held taut with impossible tension, sagged. Her gaze lifted from the incision to Ren's face, and a soft, almost imperceptible tremor touched her lips. For a moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the steady, now stronger, thump-thump-thump of Ren's heart monitor. His vital signs, previously a terrifying jagged line, were beginning to smooth out, climbing steadily back toward stability. The bleeding had ceased. The danger, for now, had passed. The dam broke. Dr. Chen, the anesthesiologist, slumped back in his chair, running a hand over his face. He hadn't realized how tightly he had been holding his own breath until the sudden, painful ache in his chest. A junior resident, standing by the wall, openly wept, tears streaming down her face, unheeded. The nurses around Elara exchanged glances, their eyes wide with disbelief and burgeoning admiration. They had witnessed not just a medical procedure, but a miracle. Raj Patel felt an extraordinary lightness spread through his chest, as if a crushing weight had been lifted. His ego, once a formidable fortress, lay in ruins, shattered by the quiet, unassuming power he had just witnessed. He walked slowly towards Elara, his usual authoritative stride replaced by one of profound humility. He looked at her, truly looked at her, for the first time, not as a rookie nurse, not as an Eastern European anomaly, but as a force of nature. Astrid Müller, her face pale but alight with a fierce, almost awestruck admiration, stepped forward. "Elara," she began, her voice hoarse, "that was impossible." "How?" She didn't wait for an answer, instead shaking her head slowly. "I've never seen anything like it." Elara, her face still bearing the signs of immense concentration and exhaustion, offered them a small, tired smile. It was a smile that held a lifetime of unspoken stories, of battles fought in places far removed from the pristine walls of Olympus General. She simply nodded towards the monitor, where Ren's heart rate continued its steady, reassuring rhythm. The medical success was not in the fragments themselves, but in the vibrant, undeniable promise of life returning to a child who had been seconds from death. The room buzzed with the aftermath of an emotional hurricane, leaving behind the quiet, triumphant calm of a life saved. A heavy silence descended upon the operating theater, thick with a mixture of disbelief and awe. The rhythmic beeping of the monitor, now a steady, reassuring pulse, was the only sound breaking the spell. Ren Sato, the child whose life had teetered on the precipice of oblivion mere moments ago, was stable. It was a miracle, conjured not by the gleaming technology or the assembled surgical elite, but by the quiet hands of a rookie nurse. Dr. Raj Patel stood frozen, his brilliant mind scrambling to reconcile what he had just witnessed with everything he believed about medicine, hierarchy, and competence. His face, usually a mask of controlled confidence, was stripped bare, revealing a raw astonishment that bordered on reverence. He had watched Elara, a subordinate he had barely noticed, perform a feat he and Astrid, two of the nation's finest surgeons, had deemed impossible. The fragments, tiny shards of death, lay in the sterile tray, stark proof of her impossible success. He slowly approached Elara, his gaze fixed on her, no longer seeing a new hire or a nameless nurse, but something profound and unyielding. The easy arrogance that usually defined him was utterly gone, replaced by a humility he rarely, if ever, showed. His voice, when it came, was a hushed whisper, barely audible above the hum of the machines, carrying the weight of his shattered preconceptions. "Elara," he began, the name feeling foreign on his tongue, imbued with a new respect, where did you learn to do that?" Elara turned, her blue eyes, once clouded with fatigue, now held a deep, unshakable calm. There was no triumph in them, no self-satisfaction. Only the quiet weariness of someone who had long since ceased to be surprised by her own capacity for the extraordinary. She looked around the room, meeting the gazes of the stunned surgical team, the anesthesiologist, the scrub nurses, the junior residents, all staring at her as if she were a ghost or an angel. Their faces reflected a dawning understanding, a collective recalculation of everything they thought they knew about her. She offered a small, almost imperceptible shrug, as if the question were mundane. "Combat zones," she murmured, her voice soft but clear, cutting through the heavy air. "In field hospitals. There wasn't always an operating theater. Or a choice." Her gaze drifted, momentarily lost in a distant memory, a place far removed from the pristine, climate-controlled walls of Olympus General. "You learned to improvise." To trust your hands. To know the body not just from textbooks, but from necessity. The words hung in the air, each one a hammer blow to their preconceived notions. 300 bullets, she added, her voice dropping lower, that I personally extracted. More wounds than I can count. A collective gasp swept through the room. 300. Not in a controlled environment, not with endless resources, but in the brutal, chaotic reality of war. The casualness with which she delivered the revelation was more impactful than any dramatic speech. It wasn't a boast, it was simply a statement of fact, a window into a past she had never volunteered to share, a skill born of unimaginable hardship and relentless duty. Dr. Astrid Müller, who had initially been so dismissive, felt a wave of shame and admiration wash over her. She looked at Elara, truly seeing her for the first time, not as a timid rookie, but as a seasoned veteran, a silent warrior whose unassuming exterior hid a profound depth of experience and a courage forged in fire. The expertise Elara possessed wasn't just technical, it was an intuitive, almost primal understanding of life and death, honed in circumstances that most of them could only dimly imagine. The room buzzed with the realization. This modest nurse, whom they had barely acknowledged, carried a silent history that dwarfed their own clinical experiences. Her hidden expertise wasn't just a skill, it was a testament to her character, her resilience, her unwavering focus under pressure, her quiet determination to save lives regardless of the odds or the environment. Raj took a step back, his hands unconsciously rising to rake through his hair. The arrogance had completely evaporated, replaced by a humbling respect that resonated deep within him. He had seen brilliance, but never this raw, this profoundly earned. Elara wasn't just good, she was a force of nature, shaped by adversity into something extraordinary. The recognition of her true worth, unburdened by rank or title, flooded the room, validating not just her skills, but her very essence as a healer. She stood there, a beacon of quiet competence, having just redefined what was possible, and in doing so, had transformed the way every person in that room would view courage, expertise, and the often overlooked quiet strength of others. Ren Sato's recovery was nothing short of miraculous. In the immediate aftermath of Elara's intervention, the critical care team worked tirelessly, but the worst was over. The internal bleeding, which had minutes earlier threatened to consume the young boy, began to subside. Over the next few days, Ren moved from intensive care to a regular ward, his pale cheeks slowly regaining a healthy flush. His parents, Kenji and his wife, were a testament to the emotional roller coaster the hospital had ridden. Their initial despair had given way to cautious hope, then overwhelming relief, and finally, profound gratitude. They never stopped thanking Elara, their eyes holding a deep reverence that needed no words. Ren, too young to fully grasp the gravity of his ordeal, often smiled shyly at the quiet nurse who sometimes visited his bedside, bringing him small, permitted treats and speaking to him in gentle, reassuring tones. His full recovery, though requiring extensive physiotherapy, was projected to be complete, a future once stolen by a stray bullet now returned by an extraordinary act of courage. The ripple effect of that day, however, extended far beyond Ren's physical healing. It irrevocably altered the human landscape of Olympus General. Elara Jovanović, the once invisible rookie, found herself transformed. Her humility remained, her quiet demeanor unchanged, but she was no longer overlooked. Where before colleagues would hurry past her, now they paused, offering genuine greetings, sometimes even a nod of respect. Junior nurses sought her advice, no longer intimidated by her silence but drawn to her profound competence. Senior staff, who once saw her merely as another pair of hands, now looked at her with a knowing glint in their eyes, recognizing the depth hidden beneath her modest exterior. Offers for specialized training, advanced positions, and even research opportunities began to surface, but Elara, ever true to herself, gently declined the flashier paths. She found her authentic satisfaction at the bedside, with her patients, teaching where she could, learning where she could, her quiet presence now a source of calm confidence for all. She remained Elara, the dedicated nurse, but her value was no longer hidden, it was celebrated. For Dr. Raj Patel, the transformation was perhaps the most outwardly dramatic. The incident had served as a profound, humbling crucible. He carried the memory of his initial arrogance, and then his desperate, trusting leap, with a new kind of sobriety. He still possessed his brilliant mind and steady hands, but his leadership style began to subtly shift. He started listening more, not just to the words of his subordinates, but to the nuances behind them, to the quiet observations that might otherwise be dismissed. He initiated a mentorship program specifically designed to identify and nurture unconventional talent, regardless of their position in the hierarchy. He began holding regular lessons learned discussions, often featuring Elara's case as a powerful reminder that expertise wears many faces. Raj became a better surgeon, yes, but more importantly, he became a wiser leader, less focused on his own prestige and more on fostering an environment where true genius, in whatever form it emerged, could thrive. His colleagues saw it, and his patients benefited from a renewed sense of collaborative spirit that permeated his teams. Dr. Astrid Müller's change was more internal, a slow recalibration of her deeply ingrained worldview. Initially, the public validation of Elara's unconventional methods had been a bitter pill to swallow. Astrid prided herself on her meticulous, by-the-book approach, and the idea that a rookie nurse had surpassed her own and Raj's capabilities was a shock to her professional identity. Yet, the undeniable evidence of Ren's recovery, the sheer audacity and precision of Elara's technique, chipped away at her rigid assumptions. She never became effusive, but her dismissive tone towards junior staff began to soften. She found herself observing more, questioning less immediately, even pausing to consider suggestions from unexpected sources. She started attending some of the mentorship workshops Raj initiated, not to lead, but to listen. It was a gradual evolution, but one that promised a future where her undeniable skill would be tempered by a more expansive understanding of collaboration and a genuine openness to diverse perspectives. The hierarchy of Olympus General, once as rigid and seemingly unmovable as the ancient mountains it was named after, experienced a profound reevaluation. The Olympus ideal, once solely defined by traditional academic achievement and established surgical prowess, expanded to include resilience, intuition, and the quiet, hard-won wisdom forged in unexpected crucibles. Ren Sato's case became legendary, a whispered tale that reminded everyone that courage and competence could emerge from the most unexpected places. It wasn't a dismantling of the hierarchy, but a softening, a widening of its perception, making it more inclusive, more human. In the end, Elara continued her quiet work, her hand still steady, her gaze still observant, but now recognized and deeply valued. Her story became a living testament within Olympus General, a testament to the enduring power of hope, the transformative potential of humility, and the profound human growth that occurs when an elite institution learns to look beyond titles and uniforms, recognizing that the truest strength often lies in the quietest, most unassuming hearts. The lesson was simple, yet profound: never judge a book by its cover, for within its unassuming pages might lie the very wisdom that saves a life, and in doing so, changes many more. Elara's story is a powerful reminder that true strength and profound wisdom often reside in the most unassuming hearts. It challenges us to look beyond the surface, to value quiet competence, and to embrace the unexpected sources of courage. What hidden heroes have inspired you in your own life? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If Elara's journey resonated with you, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us create more meaningful and impactful stories like this, and you'll become a cherished part of our global community. Thank you so much for watching and for being a part of our journey. Together, we can continue to celebrate tales that truly move us.